Hi guys, I am so excited to continue on my fruit friend journey with you all this week, and I decided to add a goofy little strawberry to the collection. Now that I have somewhat of a style down with these guys, my sketches were more straightforward. I knew the eye style as well as the expression that I wanted, but I still did debate on if I wanted to add cheeks or blush to this strawberry. This is because I knew there was going to be a lot of detail with all the little strawberry seeds in a strawberry, and I didn't want to take away from that. But I felt like that was just going to have to be something that I would have to feel out during the actual sculpting process. So after a few sketches, I decided to jump straight into it. Starting with tinfoil, I began to shape out the general form. Then I added the first layer of clay on top. I tried to smooth it out a bit, rolling the clay in my hands. Then I realized that the shape just wasn't quite right. So I went back, added some more clay on the top to bulk it out, and started smoothing again. To help with smoothing, I used liquid clay softener and rubbed it on the clay. I used my fingers at first to cover more surface area, but of course, you can use tools as well. Once I got the general shape down, I moved on to creating the little strawberry seeds. The reason why I jumped to this step was because I decided it would be easiest to throw these itty bitty seeds into the oven separately to harden them, and then press them into the soft clay. I didn't want to press these soft little circles that I was making into the clay because it just would have smushed them. I rolled a bunch of tiny pieces of clay into these little ovals and then put them into the oven to bake. Just make sure they're all separated when you do go to bake them because you don't want them to bake together and then get stuck to each other. Next step was to start on the face. I pressed out the eyes using my dotting tool and then rolled out 2 small circles. I made sure to add some bacon bond, which is a clay adhesive, to the holes before putting in the eyes. That way when I bake him, his eyes won't fall out and they'll stay put. And as I mentioned before, once the seeds were baked and cooled down, I started pressing them into the soft clay. At first, I struggled to position the seeds because they were so small and finicky. I eventually got the hang of it, but this probably would have been a lot easier if I had used tweezers instead of trying to maneuver them with my fingers. That's probably what I'll do the next time I need to work with such small pieces, but I didn't have any on hand. When the seeds were all placed out, I went back to each one and pressed them in using a pretty big dotting tool. If you look at a reference picture, the seeds of a strawberry are actually sunk into the strawberry, not raised out of them, and as soon as I pressed them in, I felt like it looked so much more natural. I also went around the strawberry with some acetone on a Q-tip just to get rid of any of the big fingerprints that I had left, and then I put it in the oven for the first official bake. While in the oven, I started on cutting out the leaves that sit at the top of a strawberry. At first, if you look back at my sketch, I had thought that they had more jagged edges, but when I actually looked up the reference pictures, they were a bit smoother. And this is why reference pictures are so important, because those small details can really have a big impact on your final result. I cut out 5 to start with, but later you'll see that I went back and cut out a couple more because I wanted the leaves at the top to be a bit more layered. I always try to keep the leaves that I create to be more organic in shape, and I typically cut them out larger than what I think they should be, because I noticed as I start to work the clay and shape the leaves themselves, the clay seems to compress a bit. Then I place the leaves on top of the strawberry, trying to figure out the general placement before committing and smoothing it onto the body. To smooth the clay out and sort of attach it to the baked part of the sculpture, I use a silicone shaper tool. This really allowed me to get under the leaves and into the right places where I really wanted to make sure that the new soft clay got stuck onto the hardened clay. You can also use that bacon bond that I used before to make sure that nothing is going to detach after being baked, but because I was pressing the soft clay down so much, I didn't think it was necessary for this step. I also thought that it was best to initially smooth all the edges of the leaves at the top together. That way I really made sure that they were stuck and attached. And then I would go back and form the individual leaves again, but by doing this, it did create an excess of clay in the center area. I felt like the leaves should dip down towards the center where they all met, and mine had gotten all built up from layering the leaves on top of each other and then just pressing them together. So to fix this, I took these scrapey tools. I don't know what the technical name for these are, and I just started to peel some clay away. When I had gotten the majority of it out, I smoothed down the surface again and then went in, like I had mentioned earlier, and started to define the individual leaves with a little dotting tool. This was the last detail of the sculpting part, so the strawberry went in for the final bake and then on to painting. For painting, I started out with primer and did a few layers of that just so I had a nice surface for my colors to stick to, and it also really makes the colors pop. And I'm sorry, but I missed the first part of painting that first coat of red. I thought I was recording and I wasn't, but all you missed was me putting a nice initial coat of this beautiful bright red down, and I really only needed a second coat of this color because it was just so opaque and vibrant. Which is funny because I moved on to the leaves next, and right away you can see the difference between these two paints. They're both the Arteza brand from the same set, but oh my gosh, was this green translucent. I want to say it was because they were trying to keep it vibrant in color, so maybe it needed to be thinner and then you just had to do a bunch of layers to really build up that bright color, but it was really, really bad compared to that red. So as you can imagine, this took so many layers to build up that color, and I wish I had known that before doing the red first, because covering up some of those accidental red spots on the leaves that I had hit, it was such a pain. I got through it though and used a nice golden yellow for the seeds that were all around the strawberry. This, again, was probably something I should have done before using the red, but this yellow was also pretty opaque, and it wasn't nearly as much of a challenge to layer up as the green was. What didn't go quickly was trying to clean up the edges around each seed. I think being more carefree with the application of the yellow and then cleaning up the edges with the red was the way to do it though. I could have tried to be super careful and not have any overlap onto the red, but there was always going to be some parts where I went out of line. Once everything was nice and clean, I added a dot of lighter yellow to each seed to add a small highlight. I also added a lighter red highlight throughout the strawberry. Once the highlights were done, I added shadows. I put a darker red around the base of the leaves where a shadow would naturally be casted. And speaking of leaves, I couldn't forget to add highlights and shadows to them. I defined each leaf using a shadow. I added a dark green along the overlapping edges. I also added a darker center where the little stem would have been. With all the base colors down and those details all finished, it was time for the face details. I put a few layers of black on each eye, keeping my hand light. That way the brush sort of just followed the curve of the circle that I had sculpted out. And once that was covered and nice and dark, I went on top with the white parts of the eye. To finish up the eyes, I took my dotting tool and added a tiny highlight to each, making sure they were both in about the same spot. And oh my gosh, I can just instantly see it come together with this. Alright, so the final step is painting on the mouth, and somehow I managed to get this right on the first try, which never happens. I threw a matte clear coat over the rest of the strawberry just to get rid of some of that gloss, and here's the final results. I love how this guy turned out so much. He is so cute and goofy looking. He's just this little derpy strawberry, and I, of course, also had to put him with his little blueberry friend. So if you haven't seen that video, I'll link the Fruit Friend playlist below. But thank you all so much for watching, and stick around to see who's gonna join them next.